Hello YouTube friends, I'm going to be sewing the dress that I've been longing to make, which has a theme so popular in the 1930s and 40s, a doggy theme based on the Scottie dog, which you see everywhere in this era. It's such a fun, lovely motif. So I've got this checkered Art Deco original 30s rayon and an original 30s sewing pattern for a very sweet, very classic shirt-waisted dress, but with that very 30s styling fitted over the hip area and then flaring out beneath, and the puffy shoulder, so very 30s. And pièce de résistance, the 30s Scottie dog buttons. I'm going to get on and cut that out. Ooh. And I'm going to film it at Eltham Palace, which is a fabulous 30s interior that was featured in David Suchet, Poirot mysteries, and all kinds of other films. I'll put the films here in case you are interested in that. So my Art Deco 30s dress is going to be sewn with entirely original fabrics, patterns, buttons, and filmed in original 30s interior. I'll get going and start cutting out. Absolutely delighted to find within my original Hollywood pattern endorsed by the glamorous Joan Bennett a list of notes from the original owner. He's an Arlene Kircher, and she's made a note of the date, March 1939, and as well as little construction notes. What I loved were these notes she's made from a book called Clothes for Girls, and the little title is Characteristics of a Well-Designed Dress. And the first is harmonious colour, which we will hope to achieve. Well balanced, by which she means formal or informal. What sort of buttons, belt buckle and fabric that you match together for a formal or informal look. And then the third, which is really interesting, is emphasis, and the advice is to have a centre of interest and then a secondary centre of interest. I guess my centre of interest will be my Scottie dog buttons, and perhaps my secondary centre of interest would be either my Art Deco belt buckle, perhaps that will go with the buttons, and the secondary be the lines of pleats down the front of the dress. And then the fourth is well proportioned, and we can see how well proportioned this dress is with the puffed shoulders balanced by the width of the skirt at the hem, and then cinched in at the waist just to create a really subtle, much more subtle than the 1950s hourglass shape, because the ideal in the 1930s was a tall looking, although they were less tall than now, kind of willowy shape. Does anyone else have this? I'm talking about interference from the doggy kingdom when you're trying to cut out fabric on the floor. It's just amazing, isn't it? How they creep up and apparently fall asleep on what you're doing. And even though surrounded by sofas, armchairs, comfy doggy beds, the only place that they feel truly comfortable is right on the piece of fabric that you're trying to cut out. Strange, isn't it? Even though I had 5 meters of the fabric, it was a really narrow vintage width, so I couldn't get all of the bodice section out in one. So I'm cut it in 2 pieces, which I'm just going to piece together, and I'm hoping the seam line will be hidden in one of the pleats. So after my daffodil print blouse, where I found that the pattern piece for the scalloped collar was missing, I'll check that I've definitely got all the pieces. There was a little note inside the envelope where the seller had carefully ticked off all the pieces, but the sleeve has been cut down to make the short sleeve, and while I would happily make the short sleeve version, the short sleeve version calls for little link buttons in the side, and I've got 6 of my Scottie Dog buttons which I want to use. So I want to make the long version. The long version of the sleeve, not there. Luckily I can see the shape of the pattern piece. I had a little go of drafting that myself, so I'll show you how I've got on. Oh. Pixie. So I haven't been filming the hours of confusion. It wouldn't have been very edifying, but I thought I might just tell you about them. So on the pattern, you can see how the pleats of the bodice line up with the pleats of the skirt. And it looks really simple, doesn't it? I don't know how it's taken me so long, but it's taken me hours. And hours. Because it's a 30s pattern, there is not yet printing on the pattern. The markings are done by means of perforations, either larger or smaller perforations to mark the grain line, fold line for cutting, etc. The problem with this is where there are 2 forms of markings to form quite a few different instructions. So I think I was alright on the skirt, eventually, with where the pleats go, creasing on the small dots on the outside. But on the bodice, it has taken me much longer because all the instructions said was to crease along the small perforations, but it didn't actually say how large to make the pleat. So unfortunately for me, I tried the bodice first, so it was only when I came to do the skirt that I realised I must have gone wrong on the bodice. I think I've got it all right now and to line up, but it took an unusually long time for me to work it out, I have to confess. Here is my pleated bodice with the pleat lines joining those of the pleats on the skirt, which looks so simple, doesn't it? The skirt piece. And the bodice piece. So here you can see a distinctive shape of the dart, and the instructions were that the dart was to be encased in a pleat. In the instructions, so all of the instructions, this is it. Really, I mainly just kept referring to the envelope where you can see the size of the pleats, and you can see that they're stitched, the ones in the skirt are stitched down to around here. You can see that they line up, and you can kind of tell how wide they are. So I've done my best, not entirely confident. So the upshot though is, take these pattern pieces away, is that at least they do line up, and I think look pretty similar to the illustrations. So hopefully my dress will look like the illustration in the end. We'll have to see. What I'm going to do now is stitch all the tucks in position. here's where I'm up to with the dress. I've sewn in all the pleats. You can see at the front, this is the overlap where the buttons will go. And the bodice is just gathered between notches on each side to fit the skirt. And I'm really liking the effect of the Alice checks. I love how when they're pleated, they just condense a little bit to form a contrast between the pleated area and the unpleated area. I just think it looks very Art Deco somehow. My next thing is to join fronts and backs, then join the skirt to the bodice, and then get going on the, actually I'll probably do the collar and the sleeves, get the whole, and the cuffs, get the whole bodice done, and then join it to the skirt as the last stage. And the opening, it's really typical of a lot of vintage patterns. The opening will just be on the left side with a little placket and a combination of pressed studs and hooks and eyes. Been a long struggle to get to what looks like this very busy stage, but I am really liking the look of it. And I can't get back far enough to show you, but skirts, let me have a go. So you can see the little tucks, little pleats, top stitched down just past the hip area, and that's a real classic 1930s design. I've come across that in patterns before where the lines of the pleats are stitched just past the hip, and then the whole skirt swishes out underneath that top stitched pleating, and that creates that 30s look, quite close fitting over the hips, but then with a swishy skirt down to about mid-calf level. As we're on a Scottie dog theme this week, I just wanted to show you my loo room. I know you might wonder why, but you'll see when we get there. So here we are. Just like Lisa, isn't it? Bobo in the Bog. If you watch me, you probably know her already. She has a lovely YouTube channel too on vintage sewing, which I'll link below, Bobo Bum, but she also does Bobo in the Bog on Instagram. Samantha in the Bog doesn't really have the same. Anyway, the reason we're here is to show you the Scottie dogs. So I actually have everywhere. We don't want to tour my home now. So that's just waiting for a little photo, but that's like a 1930s Westie on one side, Scottie on the other. Got bookends. Could do a whole video on my 1930s and 40s Scottie dog collection. But I also wanted to show you, they are framed original pen and ink drawings of Tufty the dog. So gorgeous, I think. So we're getting there. As British Rail used to say in its advertisements, I was never sure that was a very good advertising slogan actually. It carried a hint of admission of failure, doesn't it? We're getting there. So not quite there yet. The fabric is really frayy, so I've done French seam straps. It's quite a fine rayon, but for the arm cycles and the waist area, I have found some vintage bias binding, so I need to bind those seams because I put a lot of work into this dress and fabric and the buttons are so precious, so I want to kind of finish it really well. And for the opening, I'm going to do the traditional left side opening, and I did it between a zip and the combination of hooks and eyes and poppers, and I've decided to do the hooks and eyes and poppers, which I quite like. I like that traditional method for the dress fastening. It's not so popular now, people tend to use it, but the combination, which I spoke about before in my 30s polka dot dress, that poppers tend to give way if you're putting a strain on them, but they hold really well if there's not a strain, and the hooks and eyes tend to give way if they're too loose but hold if there's a strain on them. The vintage way was to either alternate them or to put hooks and eyes in the area of greater strain, which is what I've done around my middle. and poppers in the area of strain, and I find they work really well. I've just created a little placket in the side of the dress and sewn those in, so that will be how the dress fastens. It is fitted around the waist, and then of course the buttons down the front. Show you the details of the dress. The pleats are worked from the top, from the right side, and they are folded outwards and pressed and then top stitched, and they're top stitched down over the hip to form that distinctive 30 shape, fits over the hips and then flares out underneath the top stitching. And then if I pull it down, I use this red Deco belt to echo the diamond shapes of the check. I've tried to see the buttons so that the dog's head will all be upright. So there's 4 buttons down the front and with bound buttonholes. Just do these up, and at the very top corner I've put a little hook and eye to hold the top of the bodice in place, and then the collar is quite wide, so I can just do up you can see the little hook and eye there, that could just do up there to hold everything in place. And then this wide collar, and the cuffs also have the dog buttons on, so I was able to use all 6 of the buttons. And the tops of the shoulders, they have 3 pleats to form a nice little puff, and they're also slightly gathered at the very top. And then as a support I have sewn in just these little triangular pads, and with the 3 darts in the centre of the top of the sleeve and then each side of the centre, so that triangle will just fit into the shape created by the darts, create a nice little upright puff of the sleeve. The collar is just slip stitched down around the inside. And then the pleats of the bodice are also done from the front and pressed towards the outside of the garment and then top stitched down. The bodice and the skirt are both done separately, and then they're just joined with the belt just stitched. It's stitched quite far away because you can't really get the sewing machine up too close. Original Art Deco belt buckle in place too, and then everything is French seamed except for the waist seam and the shoulder seam, which I covered in a vintage seam binding. So if you're curious, I'm wearing a true vintage 1930s hat, the kind that would have been worn with this dress, and 30 style shoes from Memory Shoes, MEMERY, and they make lovely repro vintage shoes, really comfy. I recommend. I know a few of you like the 40 style ones that I was wearing with my patchwork skirt, so I'm wearing 30 style ones today, and I hope you enjoyed seeing me make my 30s dress with 30s fabric and the 30s pattern, 30s buttons. I do think it's a classic Art Deco dress. Being at Eltham Palace in those 30s interiors like used in all those films and Poirot, I felt like I could have been in an episode of Poirot with David Suchet. Perhaps I could have been the villain. That would have been fun. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up, and I shall look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.